Hey guys, I just want to let you know that I am now a certified spiritual life coach. If you resonate with the topics and lessons that my guests and I discuss on my podcast, and you feel that you could use some empowerment and direction in your journey of becoming who you truly are, consider booking a free discovery call with me on my website at kindlemccullough.com. And now on to the episode. Hey guys, I'm excited today. I have with me my new friend Elizabeth Halligan. I found her on Threads. It's an awesome new social media platform. Maybe not so new at this by now, but it's really great. You find a lot of people. I found a lot of spiritual people and a lot of resonance, and she has been just outpouring with creativity and info, and a lot of it really struck me as true, or at least there's something to it as far as I understand. This episode is definitely going to stretch me because I come from the art side of things and not the science. And so, but it'll be good. I think that it's important to, and I think you talked about this some on your own threads, that, you know, you have to have theories. You have to have the suspension of disbelief to then test these things instead of just this dogmatism or shutdown, like this can't be right, or you can't say this or whatever. And so we need to platform ideas and talk about them to discern, are they right or they wrong, and go from there. And that's how you have innovation, discovering, and all the things. So I'm already getting carried away, but thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, awesome. Well, do you want to give us some background information, like who you are, your growing up experience, education, that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. And I hope you'll weave in with any thoughts that you have as I go on about that, because it's quite a uh, long story and a
Sure.
winding road. But right now, where I am at in terms of like my life and what I'm doing is I am a certified belonging facilitator. I'm a certified culture assessor. I worked as a healthcare interpreter for many, many years, and I'm a certified strengths coach. A few other certifications, working on sexuality counselor certification. So kind of just uh, like to live in the intersection of things that affect human life and human development. But overall, I would say that I'm, a cultural systems theorist, a consciousness researcher, and been working on looking at the intersection of human development and quantum physics. I have deep expertise in translation and interpreting. I have a degree in translating and interpreting. And in the United States, that's not such a prestigious career because here we mostly work with people who are poor, with immigrants, right? But like if you are engaged in that type of work in other countries, it is a little bit more respected as a profession because you're working with, business people, diplomats, politicians. And that's really critical because I think people underestimate language. Like people talk about
Mm.
AI and they're like, it's just a large language model. But language is a scaffolding of reality. Like what you are able to think about is determined by the
Mm.
words that you have stored in your brain and the words that you have access to, right? Like think about trying to explain the concept of like a nuclear bomb or an atom to somebody who lived 300 years ago. There were no
Mm-hmm.
words for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there would be no way to visualize what that is. And so, language is very powerful. Um, and I stumbled into the world of language and sociolinguistics and interpreting because of my upbringing growing up in a fundamentalist religion. I do call it a cult. A lot of people have strong feelings about the word cult. It's got a lot of different connotations associated with it. When I say cult, I don't mean to demonize anybody or make them sound like they are, trying to create harm. But a cult is basically a group or a following gathered around something that they're really passionate about. And that doesn't always have to be a high control group. Like you talk about like the cult of Mac, and there are celebrities that have huge cult followings,
Mm.
and so like being gathered together around a cause isn't necessarily something harmful or negative. But what I'm specifically talking about is authoritarian cult, where you are indoctrinated into something without full awareness and without full consent. And so that's the environment that I was born into and grew up in and recently left. So I'll pause there and see if you have any remarks before I start going on about that whole history.
Yeah, yeah. Well, earlier you were talking about, trying to explain nuclear bomb to like someone, in history in the past. I think it's a Terence McKenna quote about how any advanced civilization looks like magic or witchcraft or whatever
Mm-hmm.
to, and so, and then of course, I was an English major. I've read a lot of books, and so I understand the power of language. And um, even being an English major has taken me time growing up as, I guess, specifically a male, learning emotional intelligence and learning those words, and that opening up my own experience of myself and the way I perceive things and the way I feel things. And yeah, the language shapes how we perceive reality and how we experience it. And yeah, it's so powerful, so integral in everything. So
Yes, exactly. I don't know if you've seen the movie Arrival, one of my favorite movies, but the whole movie is about the fact that like aliens come and bring technology, and the technology is a language that allows humans to see time and experience time differently. And
it's a great
I
movie.
believe that language, yeah, I love that. I believe that language is that powerful. And like when I watched the movie, I cried because I was like, I don't know that most people know about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which basically says like language shapes your perception and experience of reality. And speaking more than one language, it really resonated with me growing up in the church or the cult that I did. I ended up learning the Hmong language through the cult. And Hmong, and I'll explain where the Hmong people come from, but their language is non-linear. So meaning that when they speak, they don't conjugate verbs for like past, present, and future tense. Everything is spoken in present tense. And then if you need to add words, temporal markers to let people know when something happened, you do and you can. But once context and time are established, you just speak in present tense. And so that really had an effect on rewiring my brain. I had to learn to see reality differently because the language that you can speak, determines how you can think
Right.
in that
hmm
language. Yeah.
hmm Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've thought about too, especially since the last few years, and considering metaphysics and time and how our language is encoded with past, present, future, all the things. So it's training us to think in this certain way of linear time. Yeah.
Yeah. Which blows my mind. I'll get to talking about the background, but where
hmm
I've been researching now, and you might have seen that I posted this on Threads. Like, I don't know why or how humans think that time is a line, or how I haven't gone deeply enough into the history of uh, humans and math and geometry and time that we got to visualize time as a line, because everything that creates time is round. So
Right.
time is created by the planet orbiting the sun.
hmm
Time is created by the earth rotating in a
hmm
circle.
hmm
And we measure time with a clock, which, I mean, now we use digital clocks, but historically clocks are circles. So why do we visualize time as a line instead of something that spirals that we move with? Like, it's
mm
kind of strange that like that's
hmm
how we got here. And then the other day, and I put this in the paper that I wrote, and again, it's in a thread specifically. But if you look at the formula for the volume of a sphere, which is what the Earth is, right? It's like a 3D circle.
mm hmm
The volume, the formula for the volume of a sphere is 4/3 times pi times the radius cubed. And so I look at that and I'm like, okay, 4/3, what does that mean? You have 4 dimensions in 3D, which means that like time is automatically inherent to the 3D world. You can't have the
mm
3D world
Right.
without the experience of time. And
Mm-hmm.
we think that time is something that's like out there, outside of us, and like we are not fully, aware of how
This
to
is like a
access
concept,
time.
right?
Yeah, and it's like, but
Yeah.
time is inherent to 3D mass because
Mm-hmm.
mass creates movement and it creates change. And so my question is, if time is already, if we're already have access to the fourth dimension, and then it's just inherent to 3D because that's what the formula of a sphere, the volume of a sphere
Mm-hmm.
says, then like what it actually is time, and have we really fully been in it and aligned with it if it's already always been here, if we've always been fourth dimensional and we just didn't perceive that.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. I mean, we're getting into like dimensions, and really all dimensions are here at once, and so the the higher dimension, the more reality it is, and everything else is an approximation, a symbolic representation of what reality is. But our five senses can only perceive the physical, and then I think we're learning that we have abilities, extrasensory perception, to be able to sense higher dimensions. But still, we have to be humble that we don't
Yeah.
perceive reality as it is, and so and the way we think about reality is just as symbolic. It's just enough to help us function. And I think that going back to what you were saying about time and seeing it as this linear line, again, that's what language, uh, the way it draws us to think about it. But it's also like we just understand life enough to function in it to a certain degree. And as over time we've understood it in more complex ways, and then been able to have more invention and understanding, et cetera, and kind of work with it more. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just like psychological development. Kids, we have to explain to them in a very simplistic way, which we know is more complex, but that's what their brain can handle. And so there's an evolution of consciousness over time in history.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's really what I've been focused on researching. Like you said, I love Terence McKenna, and so when you brought up that quote, I was like, yes, because what we think is magical now, I think, are things that are within, the capacity of the human brain and body. It's just a matter of us not being open to them. And so that takes me to physics, and the current state of science and physics, and some of the great work that's been done, but then also some of the gatekeeping. And now people would look at me and say like, well, who are you to be talking about that, because you haven't gone to school for physics, you're not an astrophysicist, you don't have a grad degree in that, you couldn't spar with Neil deGrasse Tyson, at least people would
It's
say
a
that,
bad
but
example to bring up. He's just a spokesperson.
but again, if we go back to how language shapes reality, there's the cat. There's really a lot of evidence that shows that consciousness does shape reality. And in physics, you have the double slit experiment. That I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how many people are familiar with that, but without getting too technical, it basically is an experiment, right, where they shoot photons at slits. And depending on whether you're looking or not at that, the particles behave differently, either like waves or like particles. And so there is
Mm-hmm.
some evidence that the observer impacts the reality around them. But physics in its current state, the objective empirical science that
Like
follow the
Newtonian
scientific
physics
method,
versus quantum
yes,
physics.
yeah, they will look at that and they'll say, well, that's just, that difference just happens because of measurement. The instrument is affecting the photons, and so that's why they behave differently. But I'm like, well, but the measuring device didn't get there by itself. It's not running by itself. It's not controlling itself. Consciousness of the human brain decided to put the instrument there and is interacting with the environment. Now, the issue that comes up with that is that science has really striven to be objective and
Mm-hmm.
to eliminate bias and to try to make things as as unaffected by personal preference and subjective
Mm-hmm.
experience as possible. But the reality is that there is no such thing as objective
Right.
data.
Our observation itself is affecting things, so we can't get away
Exactly.
from.
Yeah. I mean, I worked with executives in, my career, and, I focused a lot on the human aspect of people in a corporation, and they'd be like, but data. And it's like, I would have to tell them there's no such thing as objective data. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Numbers don't lie. But all numbers are generated from subjective human experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you can, like for instance, you take if you go to the doctor and they give you that PHQ-9 survey that's like asking you about anxiety and depression. And then they'll take that and then they'll put that into, a graph and a presentation and be like, look at, this is the improvement we see from our patients. That's data, but that data is generated from the patient's subjective evaluation of their subjective experience. Like there's no such thing as objective data. And so I really feel that science has stalled and is limited because they devalue the subjective human experience. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to make sure that personal bias and experience aren't dominating
Mm-hmm.
the outcomes of our experience, but like to say that consciousness doesn't affect reality at all is what's holding us back, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The Western world is based on this idea of physicalism, is objective science, materialism, and specialization. And I think it's just about balancing that with the Eastern perspective that there's something deeper than the physical reality, which is funny because a lot of religions in the West believe that, but they have this like dualistic split between science and spirituality, and which is just not real, basically. But
Yeah.
anyways, the East, the holistic perspective, and that experience is important. And it does shape our perspective, and how are things interconnected? Because everything is interconnected, and so are missing the grand picture if we just split everything up. So the Western and East together can be amazing. But we're just
Yeah.
starting to get there.
Yes, that's so well said. And that's exactly kind of the intersection that brought me to where I am now. And I can, I'll explain how I got here, in terms of my experience with the religion or the cult. But as I exited that context, I saw what you were saying, that Western philosophy and science put a lot of emphasis on the material world and this illusion of objectivity to an extreme degree, disregarding the subjective and the importance of the mind and the power of it. Whereas Eastern philosophy, I think, is so wonderful. Being around people, a lot of their cosmology is based on Taoism, and so I really liked a lot of the things that I learned from Hmong cosmology and the language that are weaved, or I can't speak English, that have been woven throughout their beliefs. But at the same time, Eastern philosophy, a lot of it seeks to transcend the body, as if the body itself is not holy and sacred. And so either way, you have this imbalance of
Right.
never truly having an integration between the brain and the body, because one seeks to transcend it and the other focuses too deeply on it. And
Right.
a lot of my work and my research right now is focused on that integration and understanding what is the ghost in the machine and how do you integrate the body. My view is really that the body is a transducer of consciousness, and that it is the point. And that integration, the stability of consciousness and the integration of it, happens when the brain and the body are completely aligned.
Yeah, I love that. I think I agree. I've talked about different episodes like panentheism, animism, consciousness, sentience,
Mm-hmm.
like lots of different ways of understanding it. And we're all exploring the same kind of ideas, really.
Yeah, that's a great distinction too, because I think that that's really what the split is between Western and Eastern philosophy, right? So Western philosophy really focuses a lot on sentience, which is feeling, and then Eastern philosophy focuses on consciousness. And a lot of people use the terms interchangeably, but from my understanding of language and the way people talk about the two things, when they're getting specific, they're not the same thing. You can be sentient, you can feel. Plants feel, they react to sunlight. How conscious are they? We don't know. Um, so consciousness is awareness. It's awareness of
Mm-hmm.
being aware,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you know, being
Mm-hmm.
able to have that
Mm-hmm.
metacognition, whereas sentience is feeling. And I really think that most humans, in terms of like looking at our evolutionary progress and process and what consciousness is, like most humans are not fully conscious.
Right.
They're sentient and more like running inherited survival algorithms that they've just had passed down to them, and like being able to stop and look at the loops that they're running may not necessarily be there. And that takes me to my background of growing up
Mm-hmm.
in the cult and being born into that context. My parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I haven't actually. This is the first time I'm actually talking about this in a podcast or with somebody publicly. The reason is because Jehovah's Witnesses practice a really or austere form of shunning. So if you leave, you can be soft shunned, which people kind of treat you like you're toxic because they're afraid that you'll pull them out of the faith, and it is the absolute truth, like the only path to salvation. And if you actually resign your membership, I don't know if you've seen The Mandalorians. I haven't seen it, but I know the context. But they consider you an apostate. So, like, that's worse than death. Like, they believe that Satan is controlling your mind, and that, like, you're under the influence of Satan and demons, and that you're a danger to them, and that you'll pull them away if they interact with you. So then, um, but they will treat you like you're worse than dead and won't talk to you at all. And I left their religion just by doing what's called fading out, which means, I just kind of quietly moved across the country. I changed my phone number and I just kept to myself and stayed quiet. So nobody, nobody really knew what I was up to. And so that way I was able to kind of like keep contact with some of my family. Um, but like just to sit with you here now and tell my life story is something that could get me excommunicated in their context because they consider it heretical to talk about the religion or anything that might make them look bad, or even
Mm-hmm.
if it's just your personal life
Mm-hmm.
experience. But I've just got to the point where like I see echoes of our shared reality in my experience growing up in that and leaving it. And so I think it's important to share the story despite, the kind of personal pain and risk that comes with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being brave and doing that. I mean, my experience was a lot less extreme. I grew up Protestant Christian, um, but when I did start the podcast, I did have a lot of anxiety about talking about different things and what people might think or say. So I can imagine how much more extreme and the feelings that you have. And but I'm right there with you. I think it's important to talk about everything and to not be
Mm-hmm.
ashamed about it, to bring the darkness into light, and to be in our power and be in our voice, and um, to express ourselves, and also be free to you know potentially be wrong, and that's okay too. We're growing, we're learning. But if we don't talk about things, if we don't discuss, then we're not going to get anywhere. We're just going to stay stuck in the same cycles. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, there are a lot of similarities across the different domains, I guess, if you'll call them, Christianity. And it's not that I don't like find a lot of value in the lived example of Jesus. So I'm not anti
Right.
faith and
Mm-hmm.
anti spirituality by any means. In fact, my whole journey and like all of my research was because, upon exiting that context and realizing, oh my gosh, like everything that I ever believed was absolutely true is not absolutely true. So like now how do I rebuild a framework to make sense of navigating the world? I still had that yearning for spirituality, but for me, I was like, I need it to make sense with science. And yet science uh, devalues spirituality. And so I've just been determined to figure out what is the bridge between spirit and science. And to me, it is consciousness. To me, that is the bridge between
Mm-hmm.
spirituality and science. But like science really struggles with that. And so that's why I go to quantum physics. And even, Einstein, like he really struggled with quantum physics at first and didn't like the what he called the spooky action of
Mm-hmm.
quantum physics. And I think that like the truth lies in the things that scare us when we don't understand
Mm.
them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think I read a paper about like how he discovered like the ether, but then later he like recanted that, and
Yeah.
they like were like, "Ah, that's not actually real." But it's like, oh, they actually were onto something.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, like, what is and is not real is like constantly changing depending on what we will allow ourselves to see and believe. And so that was, my experience of growing up in the cult. So I was born into that context. My parents, my mom, her family, her mother became Jehovah's Witness, when she was probably like 11 years old, I think. And then my dad, I believe he I don't remember when his parents um, became Jehovah's Witnesses, but he grew up in it too. And so I was born in that context, and they actually call their religion the truth. Like, so when you're like in church or, you're just hanging out with people, they'll be like, oh, how long have you been in the truth? Like, that's what they call it. Like,
Mm.
put the trademark symbol next to
Mm-hmm.
the truth. Like, that's how they feel about it. And so you grow up with that. And a lot of their explanations, you know, kind of like they feel good. Nobody would follow religion if some part of it didn't make them feel good. Right? Like,
Mm.
and as human beings, like we want hope to anchor to when we're navigating, the difficulties of life. And they're uniquely one of the few religions that doesn't believe in like going to heaven when you die. They believe that um, existing in the body on earth is the point, and that
Mm.
was, God's true intention was to be able to like create a planet or a reality where we can exist, kind of as long as we want to in the flesh, which like I still kind of mind with. Like I feel like, we could probably figure out how to live longer if we could align and get along. But we don't seem to be able to do that. And that's where some of my interest in quantum physics lies. Um, and a lot of the things I was taught, did make me, I think, a decent person in a lot of ways. Like I think, but I don't think that you need the construct of organized religion to be a moral person. I think that people who are moral are inherently attracted to religion because it gives them scaffolding.
Mm. Gives them language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, gives them language. Yeah. So, but like Jehovah's Witnesses is a very interesting religion because I don't think people. It's quite a large group. I think they're almost like 9 million members now, but I don't think people realize the degree of control that is exercised in that group, and it seems normal when you grow up in it. But
Mm-hmm.
if you look at Steve Hassan, he's one of the foremost cult experts uh, currently, that has researched this area. And he actually was in a cult called the Moonies that originated in South Korea, and I believe like maybe in the 70s. And so he took his experience and, has created this entire framework, and he calls it the BITE model, which it stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. And so high control groups seek to control your behavior. There are a lot of like, so growing up as Jehovah's Witness, there's a lot of rules about like how you dress, how you talk. Um, the religion is inherently anti-Black, just because a lot of the things that come from Black culture are kind of labeled as like worldly. So they call people that aren't in the religion worldly people. Now they kind of tend to use the phrase unbelievers, but basically they're outsiders and they're
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
the dangerous other that will pull you
Mm-hmm.
into, you know, God dishonoring behavior if you spend too much time with them. But like, a lot of, and my mom is Black, my dad's white, but like growing up, a lot of things inherent to Black culture were kind of considered taboo, and just like all these kinds of rules, like how long your skirt is, and like, there was a time where like they didn't want Black women to have natural hairstyles, and like what color shirt you would wear on the stage when you give a talk. Just very, very high control, but like you're used to it because you're born into it, so you don't
Mm-hmm.
think anything of it. You just think that this is
Right.
proper and this is what honors God. And then, like information, you are not allowed to read, you're not supposed to read anything about the religion outside of the religion. It's considered apostate material, and material that will corrupt your faith. And it's like, well, if this is truth, like, shouldn't truth be able to stand up to interrogation, to questioning? But it's like, no, like it'll erode your faith. Like, well, there's probably a reason why. Um, what you think about. So there's constant thought policing. I actually developed a severe case of obsessive compulsive disorder, and kind of only now just learned to tame it. And I had what's called pure O, which is the obsessing is the compulsion. Like you keep on playing things over and over in your head to like sort
Mm-hmm.
through it and kind of calm yourself down. But like constant thought policing, like, some of it's really wild, but like, if you have like, let's say like a sexual thought, and it's like, well, what were you reading before that? And
Mm.
what were you doing that caused you to have that thought? Or if you had like a sexual dream, like what were you doing that caused you to have that, and that might make you fornicate and, engage in premarital sex. And so like it's like you're constantly like um monitoring yourself for impure thoughts, and members are encouraged to police one another. So like if you do something that steps out of line, people are encouraged to report on each other. And they don't like phrase it that way, but that is
Mm-hmm.
what it is.
Yeah.
And
That's
yeah,
1984 right there.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Wow.
so you just live in perpetual anxiety of doing the wrong thing. And then like there are different levels of volunteering in the religion. They don't pay them, but psychologically it still comes with prestige. And so, you are always under threat of like, if I don't behave perfectly, I'm going to lose this like prestigious community position
Mm.
and like fall
Mm-hmm.
from grace. And then people soft shun you, and, you lose your reputation. And then at worst, you can be excommunicated. They call it disfellowshipping. But basically, well, now because they were getting sued in the country of Norway, they would disfellowship or excommunicate kids, and then the kids would lose their entire community. So imagine like a 16-year-old not
Wow.
being able to talk to anybody in their family or their community
Mm.
because they
Mm-hmm.
had sex with somebody or something before they were married. That would happen, and people were like unaliving themselves because of experiencing that. And the country of Norway deregistered them as a religion because they felt like this is human rights violations, especially human rights violations for children. And there's currently a legal battle still underway over this, back and forth between the state and the religion. But like it's very serious. And so like when I was waking up from this context and realizing like, oh my gosh, this is a cult. It's not the truth, it's a cult. You have to grapple with that. It is existentially terrifying because you're like, I am starting to see through this, but if I let myself see all the way through, I lose everything. And I can't emphasize enough how just terrifying and gutting and grievous and painful that type of situation is, because then it's like, not only are you realizing that your whole life is a lie, but you have to mourn all of the time that you lost, that you could have been
Mm,
somebody else, that,
mm-hmm.
like the truest version of yourself. There were things that I didn't do. Like, I love music, and I didn't pursue a music career because I was told that it's like the world is ending, like God's gonna bring Armageddon because this is like Satan's world and everything's gonna be destroyed. And so like if you invest all this energy in that, like you might just get destroyed with the world, and then you're gonna miss like the real world that's coming. And so you just spend your whole life doing everything for church and trying to proselytize people for this big end that's coming. And so like, yeah, it's just, you have to grieve that, but then you also realize, wow, like if I now go do my thing, I lose everything that I had. And so that's a high control religion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's intense.
Yeah. It was like brings me to physics, because like as I was waking up and I started researching, I was trying to figure out, like, okay, if what I believed my entire life is not the absolute reality, what is reality, and how do I reconstruct um, a worldview that I can live with that makes sense. And I was really struggling, with that. And one of the things that stuck with me is a quote by Richard Feynman, who is, a really um, important person in the world of physics. But he says, um, I'd rather have um, questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And that's what I live by. And being in that religion where like they teach you to view the whole world as an illusion, as fake, like, so I'm waking up and I realize, okay, not only is the whole world an illusion, but the world I thought was true is also an illusion. It's not true. It's a construct. It's a high control group. And never mind all the inconsistencies in doctrine and cosmology I was also starting to see. And then hypocrisy inside of the organization itself that was making me wake up. But then I'm looking at the rest of the world and I'm like, well, how many other things aren't real then out here also that are about control and
Mm,
constructing a version of reality that is used to keep people under thumb? Yeah, so I was just it was like, whoa, I feel like almost nothing is real. Um,
mm,
as I was like looking at the similarities between like my job, corporate America, and the religion. Jehovah's Witnesses are also very anti like career, and so like it was taboo that I was kind of raising in the ranks in the company I was at. But then that's how I started seeing kind of through some of the religion, because I was like, wow, this really operates like a corporation, and like a corporation from the
mm.
1950s, not one from
Mm,
2020, 2020 or 2021 or whatever it was at the time. But then I started looking at things and I was like, wait a second, money is not real. Like it's not backed by gold anymore. And gold is only valuable because we say it's valuable, and diamonds are only valuable because we think that they're valuable. It's only because we assign value to them. But like they're pretty much like Mario coins. It's like money in a box, like in a Monopoly box. Like it's not actually real. It just has
mm.
value because we say it has value. And so like when your whole worldview starts falling apart, you start looking at like looking through everything.
Right. Questioning everything. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's how I got here. And so then I just was like, what is real? What is irrefutably, incontrovertibly real and true? And what is just stuff that we have made up to make sense of our existence?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that, anytime you lose what you consider to be most like fundamental to your understanding of the world, that's your rock. That's what keeps you from like feeling crazy and like,
Mm-hmm.
that's my belonging. That's my lens, my worldview. And when you lose that, it's so destabilizing and scary and all the things, and you feel lost. And so you're looking for something for that rock.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important because I see some people who are so bitter about their experience that they're like, I don't want beliefs. I just want to deconstruct from anything that I don't like and push away from that. But then then you're stuck in that loss and bitterness. And in the long run, that's really unhealthy. Although in the short run, I can see how you're wrench, like a towel, like off of the dirtiness. But yeah, so that's great. So yeah, continue.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That segues to like what I was thinking, in terms of how do you integrate the trauma of that type of experience and build upon it without it, totally destroying any type of real future that you can have. And to me, doing this research really has taken me to looking at the brain and why people make the choices that they do and how they integrate trauma. And then as I studied that, I looked at the evolution of the human brain. Now, like for people that still believe in God or the idea of a first cause for humanity anyway, I'm not precluding the idea that there might be a greater universal consciousness outside of us. Like I don't know that, right? Like we don't know that. But I do think that evolution is the only mechanism by which a greater consciousness could allow free will to operate. Because how else do you create something and let it truly choose unless you allow it to choose its own evolutionary course? And so I don't think that the idea of evolution conflicts with the idea of God or higher consciousness. I think that evolution is the mechanism by which free will possibly unfolds.
Right. And we can only be as free as we are aware of our patterns and, our impulses and our bad habits and addictions, all those things. The more we become aware of that, then we can start to deal with that and then become free to make our own choices. And that's evolution.
Exactly. And that is consciousness. That's where I think the bridge is, because you mentioned it, you said it so perfectly, like becoming aware of your choices and your patterns. That is evolution. Like evolving enough as a pattern until you see the pattern that you've become, and you can then choose to direct the pattern. And I think humans are just barely at that point. Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of reading about Julian Jaynes' theory of the bicameral mind, and I've written a lot about that on Threads. I don't know if if you've seen Westworld.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, you've got to watch it. I cannot recommend to people enough. It's hard to get access to because it got canceled and then whatever with like
that's
HBO.
Why I haven't,
like it's weird, but for me, I feel that is essential entertainment. I don't think it's entertainment. I think it is the story of humanity. But basically, the premise is that and it's based off of a movie from the 70s. But the premise is that there's this park where they have these like AI hosts. They call them hosts, but they're indistinguishable from humans, other than the fact that their brain is a CPU rather than a carbon-based brain. It's like think of like a silicon-based CPU versus a brain. And they can, like the people come into the park and they can shoot them, they can, sleep with them, whatever, and abuse them. And then they just get sent back to like the lab, they refurbish them and then send them back out. And each of the hosts has like a storyline and a script that they follow, which, they can adapt based on, the guest's behavior, but they always follow this programmed loop. And one of the hosts starts to become aware of the loop. Well, more than one. And so, it really looks at this like idea of what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be conscious? And the main character hears the voice of her creator, and the creator of the hosts in the park, his name is Arnold. And so she hears Arnold talking to her all the time. So this goes to, it's a reflection of Julian Jaynes' bicameral mind theory. And so his theory was that consciousness as we know it now was not present in humans until about 3,000 years ago. That before that, the corpus callosum, which is like the band of brain tissue that connects the hemispheres, wasn't really fully integrated. And so ancient peoples had some awareness, but one side of the brain heard the other side of the brain as commands from God,
Mm.
and they didn't really realize that they were hearing their own voice inside of their head. And so that reflects this storyline in Westworld where Dolores, like the main host, is hearing Arnold and doesn't know that it's her own voice.
Mm.
And when I take that theory and you look at religions throughout history, think about like Moses and the burning bush. If the brain wasn't fully, integrated, both sides, like it makes total sense how like the right side of the brain may have been projecting auditory and visual hallucinations and hearing the left side of the brain as God, not realizing that the brain was hearing itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also the psychedelic theory about that, and how it could have been a psychedelic push and then put him in an altered state. But I definitely like, I pick up what you're saying. I don't know if you've heard of spiral dynamics.
Mm-mm.
Anyways, it's a sociological and psychological stages of development. And I read this one book which examined Christianity and the Bible and its history over time. And, Judaism to Christianity, but in showing how the stages of evolutionary development and how we perceive the world and our beliefs and everything about it, how that's played out over time in the Bible as well. And so I often think that our understanding of God is more of a projection about us and our understanding than it is the truth of who God is. And so I can see that so clearly through the Bible, and I'm sure that you can do that with any religion or society in general.
Yeah, and that goes back to, again, like with physics, where I'm saying that like consciousness, the observer shapes reality. Right? Like you construct reality based on what you are able to perceive. And I think like that's why Jesus in the Bible feels so different from the Old Testament, because here he is like, in the Bible, it said that he spoke as someone with authority and not as the scribes and Pharisees, because he was speaking from like true inner gnosis, real inner knowing. And he said to them, like the kingdom of God is within you. I think that for his time, he had reached an unprecedented degree of brain integration where he knew he was hearing himself and recognized that like how powerful the brain was, and that people were not fully conscious, and was trying to teach them metacognition, how to see the loops and the programmed algorithms, and to be aware of being aware. And that type of awareness is dangerous when people can see through the constructs that society uses to control and blind. To empower people with that level of awareness is dangerous. And then you see the reaction from, the powers that existed at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that, that takes me to the other place of like research that I've been building upon, looking at that. So, and to be honest, I don't think that like evolutionarily that this idea of like Neanderthals and, like these kind of like, what do you want to say more? I'm not saying that like the evolutionary path didn't come from like a branch of ape. Like we don't really know that for sure, but, obviously there's genetic similarity, but like, I don't think that, 40,000 years ago, or, however long it was, that there was like more of maybe it was 100,000 years ago, I forget the exact stats, but that there was like some type of like caveman human that preceded us. I do think that the brain is driving human evolution. And I think that the spectrum of humanity that has brought us to today still exists to some degree. I think we do have people on the planet who still don't have that full hemispheric integration. I think some of them are in power. I think that they hear their left brain as commands from God. We just had like a politician the other day who was saying that like he believes that he's like Moses. And that he's like here executing like God's plan. I believe that he believes that. And I believe that he's still in that place where the left and right hemisphere are not fully integrated. And so like he is not aware that he is hearing his own voice and his own brain talking to him. I think that what the other integration of the brain that I think is critical, and where I think humanity is stuck right now, is an evolutionary integration between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic brain, specifically the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain. To me, like, the amygdala is the center of the brain that runs the fear algorithms. It's the master governor of the fight or flight, freeze, fawn response. And it doesn't care about your soul alignment. It doesn't care about your hopes and dreams. It just cares about keeping you alive right now. And it operates on black and white binaries. And if your prefrontal cortex doesn't have governance over that part of you, you will be dominated by the amygdala, and you will be reactive rather than proactive. And I see most of humanity stuck there. And I believe that the prefrontal cortex is really the thing that enables full conscience, which is critical to consciousness, because a conscience is the observer that can, it's the I that can question me. But if you don't have if you don't have that ability, then how aware can you be of your choices and your ethics and your morality? So of course you're going to default to a framework of control, of religion, to give you that, because you don't have that inner observer that is able to fully be aware of the pattern and the loops. And
yeah, I can see that development within myself over time. I think it started getting trained in meditation in undergrad, and then in grad school I had an awakening and continued developing from there. But yeah, I mean, fear, like biologically, it narrows our vision, and we become hyper focused in this small capacity, and it makes us tense up, and then we start to see life more dualistically and more just like quick action and reactive and all the things. So it makes complete sense.
Yeah, I like that you brought up experiencing awakening, because a lot of people talk about like Kundalini awakening when they kind of are going through a spiritual journey. And I don't think that that's not spiritual, but I also think that it's neurological.
Sorry, I jump in, but it's really cool for me, like doing research and I started in the spiritual path of that my experience seemed most like a Kundalini awakening. But then I look at somatics and I see like animals, and I see that whenever they experience trauma and they're coming out of that, their body's like shaking, and they're shaking off that trauma. We know like the body keeps a score, it creates tension and pain and illnesses, all the things. And when you really work that through, then your body is shaking off that and releasing and loosening. And that is a powerful experience of energy that can really vault you into this transcendent state for a little while.
Yes, that's so well said. Yeah, exactly. That is exactly what I'm thinking of. And so like I used to be completely honest, so, like when I was going through this, my own journey and doing this research on the brain and spirituality and quantum physics, and like people would talk about chakras, and I'd be like, I've never felt that. Like I try to meditate, like I haven't felt that. So like, what are people feeling? And then I got to this certain stage of, understanding, working through trauma from the religion, from I love both my parents. They did the best that they knew how to do, but like there's a lot of trauma from that container too. And I got to a point where like I just had this, what I would call, an awakening. And I literally felt like there were spinning nodes of energy on my spine. Like I never felt anything like that before. Like somebody attached a battery pack to my spine. Yeah, and it just, and it blew me away. And then as I was doing research on like Julian Jaynes' bicameral mind theory, and then thinking about like the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, in the body keeps the score. He specifically says, Bessel van der Kolk says, the medial prefrontal cortex is the only part of the brain that can rewire trauma in the limbic brain. And so to me, and then I look at the research around autism and like ADHD, they know that there is a connection between the amygdala and autism. They just don't know exactly what it is. And to me, it all points to, this is not disordered These are not disorders. They are all different manifestations of the evolution of the brain, where the prefrontal cortex is trying to integrate the amygdala so that humans stop operating from a fear-dominated
Mm.
existence. And so when I experienced that kind of Kundalini awakening, I was like, holy crap, is this that? Like, finally, the vagus nerve is aligning. The vagus nerve, the body's like largest antenna, if you will, is aligning fully with the brain, such that the signals of the prefrontal cortex are finally getting through the entire spine.
Yeah, I know. I felt like my awakening. I was like, oh, I felt like I connected both sides of my brain, and then connected that with my body,
Mm-hmm.
and it's what then created the okay, now connected, boom, energy, no blocks, fully moving through, and then yeah, we know like the brain, the right and left side is like this, type A, like feminine or masculine. There's anima animus is what Jung calls it. Like there's so many ways of understanding and describing it, but it's like the logical, linear, step by step. It's basically like the Western versus the Eastern way of thinking, and then to the intuitive, holistic, non-linear. It's like the science and the spirituality.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because, Jung talked so much about integration of the shadow. And I
Mm-hmm.
really feel like he was experiencing and intuiting this exact same thing, the idea of the brain trying to create a nonlinear loop inside of itself to integrate the limbic brain so that the amygdala isn't dominating uh, human existence. Because if you look at like right now, like you look at like a lot of people are talking about what's happening in Gaza, and like people don't understand how you know people can be like, I love Jewish people, but like what's happening there is difficult. And like I posted a thread the other day that I'm like, borders aren't real. Those lines don't exist on the planet's crust. Those are lines that humans have drawn because we live in fear. And so if you are trying to keep your tribe safe and you view everything that's not part of your tribe as threat, you draw lines.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the amygdala literally is like the driver of human extinction because it can't imagine an existence where things can just be safe and thrive. Like it needs this paradigm of like us versus them and
Mm-hmm.
you against me and safe not safe. And so like when you're stuck and
Or
you
my
don't
religion is safe and right, and
exactly
yours is not.
exactly that. And so like we stay stuck in a paradigm of being unable to imagine thriving together. And so I believe that like that is the frontier of human evolution and consciousness right now, is people who can integrate trauma. And like you said, it is in the body, because how else does the prefrontal cortex branch and make inroads into the limbic brain other than to take all of that stored trauma? Because trauma is pre-verbal, it's not coded in language,
Mm.
right? Like, so if
Mm-hmm.
the prefrontal cortex, which is the language center and the higher awareness center of the brain, is making nonlinear branches back into the limbic brain, you've got to feel through that, grieve through it, shake through it. I really believe that's why autistic people, you see so much stimming in them. I am autistic, I have ADHD. Like I experienced an enormous amount of stimming going through what I believe was this process. Like there were 2 weeks straight where like literally I could only sit in the closet and shake. And I think that we're seeing evidence of that evolutionary process where it's just manifesting differently in different people, because evolution doesn't happen perfectly. It is iterative. And some people, I think, are stabilizing this evolutionary bridge differently than others, depending on their own choices, their parents' choices, and the epigenetic nervous system they inherited from their parents and their ability to integrate. But that's like really what I think is happening right now.
Yeah, yeah. Have you heard the telepathy tapes?
So many people have told me about the telepathy tapes, and I haven't got a chance to sit and listen to it. I think like I put it off because I know that my spine's gonna tingle when I do. But that's on my list.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. But I have a couple of friends autistic, and my friend's like, I think you're autistic. I was like, maybe a little bit. But no, I think it's great. I think that they see the world differently, and I think they see things uniquely in a way that can help us move forward, and
Mm-hmm.
not hindered in a way that so many other people are. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think a lot of people get offended by that. People that are autistic get offended when I say I think this is evidence of evolution, and I think they hear that as me saying like this is just a superpower because they associate the word
Right.
evolution with like advanced
Mm-hmm.
superhuman, and it doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
that. It just means change, and that the brain is trying to iterate into a new pattern. And that doesn't mean that some people don't experience disability from it. They do, especially because we live in a dysfunctional, linear world full
Mm-hmm.
of harmful constructs. So, like, it, even more feels like a disability when if you're experiencing this evolutionary change and the world doesn't see that and only labels it as disorder, and then you're also not getting integration support for that. But I really do think that, like, I even think schizophrenia, again, like, is an example of the evolution of the brain. Because if you go back to Jane's bicameral mind theory, right, he was saying that
Mm-hmm.
when the left and right hemispheres aren't fully integrated, our ancestors were seeing auditory and visual projections and thinking it was God. Like, that sounds like schizophrenia to me. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
are we absolutely like inhibiting the evolutionary process by looking at everything as disorder rather than really looking at the ghost in the machine and realizing that the human brain is really the driver of evolution and that the body adapts afterwards, and follows.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that genes are scaffolding, and I think that genes are a fossil record of the evolution of the brain, and that people who make the neurological evolutionary leap are the ones who survive and we see their genes afterwards, but that it's really being driven by neuroplasticity and the changes of the brain.
Mm. Yeah. So does that have to do with like supposedly junk DNA? And I mean, earlier we were talking about how like trauma from the parents and grandparents and working through that.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give you examples. So, like, not to stereotype, but like look at how like black people or African Americans like dominate the world of athletics now, especially. That's not. I don't believe that that's uh, a genetic thing in that, like, oh, black people just have better DNA. I don't believe that. What I do believe is that if you take a group of people and you put them in bondage for 400 years and make them do hard labor, and their brain and their nervous system has to adapt all of those generations to survive and be strong under that hard labor, you are shaping a nervous system. And
Mm.
epigenetic research already shows this, that like epigenetics is still fairly new, and at first it was kind of like, oh, this is like hooey, but like now it is an established branch of science. And if you look this up, they are just at the point of integrating epigenetics into evolutionary biology. We don't really understand how it drives evolution, but there's evidence that it does. And really what it shows is that the brain and the nervous system are a gene switch system. So you have genes, you have scaffolding, but the brain and the nervous system are kind of determining through many different mechanisms, like chemical, hormonal, what genes are expressed and how. So again, this goes back to consciousness. Like, you inherit a nervous system, and the nervous system is shaped by thoughts and reactions to the environment. And so, like, I really think that the dominance of like black people in sports, the success is because you have generations of human beings that were forced into hard labor that had to integrate the trauma of that and develop the nervous system resilience to survive it. And so you have a higher threshold of endurance and persistence that was passed on through generations
Mm.
by choice and
Mm-hmm.
reaction. So that is evidence to me alone that like the brain and the neuroplasticity of the nervous system are driving evolution, and that genes are just code, they're just scaffolding that are shaped by epigenetics.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Just like the brain has neuroplasticity, our genes have adaptability and a lot of hidden potential or harm, depending on how we use it and what we use.
Yeah, and it's like I know we've talked quite some time, but that brings me to the other like really, really critical piece of what I think that junk DNA in the body actually does. And tying back to how like Eastern philosophy kind of transcends the body, Western philosophy and science just kind of treat the body like a meat sack of carbon that in consciousness is a happy accident. I don't think so. But there's a theory that the brain actually tunes consciousness from the quantum field like an antenna, like a transducer. That consciousness is not something that just kind of like is spontaneously generated by the body, but that the body pulls consciousness from the quantum field.
Mm-hmm.
I started coming to this conclusion on my own through my own research. I did not know that it already was a theory that had been proposed until
Oh, that's beautiful.
the last year. And so
Mm-hmm.
then to me, I'm like, okay, so then wouldn't DNA then be antenna that specifically tune a unique consciousness signature, right? Like what makes me different from you? It is
Right.
genes
Or
in a
plants
nervous system.
or animals.
Yes. And to me, it'd be like, well, if the antenna is coded differently to be this unique pattern, then that's what's making me different from you, that the body is the tuner. And then that really aligns with a lot of Bessel van der Kolk's research and like the people that, with him, that have been in this space looking at how the body is critical to trauma integration, that if the body is the transducer of
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, then
Mm-hmm.
the like see even the computer agrees with your other
We got a like bubble.
yeah that's really the key to understanding evolution and consciousness, that the brain is tuning it, and the brain's ability to integrate holistically and create a pure feedback loop between the brain and the body is what determines whether that consciousness is really stable and fully aware. And so I had just posted a thread yesterday about, and this is like where we were talking about the math part, and like you don't have to get into the math to understand this, but there is this very kind of like this math function that's been a mystery for a very long time that has not been solved. And like without going into it too much, like it's a function where like it's got this line, it's called a critical line at 1/2 on an XY graph. And the function of this, and the calculations of this mathematical function, all of these specific numbers fall on this line. And they don't really know why. Why do all the numbers fall on this line? And so the person who came up with this function calculated a lot of these numbers that fall on this line, like, and then they've used computers to calculate it out, and they all seem to fall on this line within this certain function and the way that they plug in the numbers, and they don't know why. And so they're trying to solve it by proving like, okay, if you keep on counting to infinity, will all of these numbers in this mathematical function continue to fall on this like magical line? And nobody can solve it, because how do you prove up to infinity that all these numbers fall on this line?
Mm-hmm.
And I was staring at this thing, and if you look at the function, it's on my thread, but like,
Yeah, I saw it.
yeah,
It was interesting.
it looks like the way that you could imagine like particles folding, and then I was like, why is this line at 1/2? Why would it be at 1/2? And I thought, wait a second, like 1/2 is the diameter of a circle. And like everything that is critical to existence is a circle, right? Like a sphere. The Earth is a
Mm-hmm.
sphere, the stars are spheres,
Mm-hmm.
like atoms maybe not be perfectly spherical, but like their orbits, the orbits of
Mm-hmm.
electron clouds, are sphericals. And I was like, what if this is like a function that has to do with the volume of a sphere? And that's where I started looking at the volume of a sphere. And I thought, what if this is not a math function that needs to be defined? What if it's the math function that defines the universe? What if it is the math function that tells us how things in the universe come into existence, how the formless becomes form, how the weightless becomes mass? So I started looking at these numbers. They're called zeta zeros, like that the original person who came up with this math function calculated, and he calculated them out, and then other universities and institutions have calculated them out, like use computers to calculate them out to the thousands. And I started looking at the calculations, and I was like, okay, the first one is 14.1. The next one is like 21. And then I started looking and I was like, wait, this is very close to the frequencies that surround the planet. So Earth's baseline frequency is its own like unique frequency, but then like the next frequency up.
Screaming resonance.
Yeah. So the like 7.83 hertz is the Earth's unique frequency, but then the next one up is 14.1 hertz. And the very first calculation on this math function is 14.1. And then the next frequency of Earth is like 20.3, I believe. And then you look at the next calculation in this math function, and it's 21 something. And they line up with the frequencies that surround the Earth. And so I was like, what if this is the math function that describes the frequency bands that exist in the quantum field? And that when mass becomes something that can hold its form, it has to attenuate or balance with these frequencies in the quantum field in order to hold itself in mass. And then I thought, so then if the brain is like an antenna or a transducer of consciousness, what is actually happening? And what I really think is happening is that the quantum field is just electromagnetism, and that electromagnetism exists at different frequency bands, and the brain is just tuning frequency into itself like an antenna and bending those frequency bands into a unique consciousness signature, which means like we're all running literally on the same source, and we can't remember how we got here, and we're all just fighting about it.
Yeah, I definitely have come to the understanding, a belief that we are an antenna of energy, and that like emotions are energy in motion, and thoughts are just energy in the brain. So it's just different energy in different places in our body, and then our brain interprets our emotions, and emotions play off of our thoughts. So it's all interconnected. And so it's like, where do our thoughts come from? Well, like, we don't know. It's just like, it's like we're picking up energy, and based on how we're tuning, I guess one side of our brain is like choosing, what are we going to do with this? And are we going to tune more to love or, fear or whatever? Then we pick up more and more of this same type of energy.
Exactly. And so I think that the trauma integration piece is so important, because the evolutionary trajectory of humans has been one of domination and pain. And so even if you haven't experienced a lot of personal pain in your life, that the epigenetic inheritance of human evolution is one of domination and survival. And if awareness is a nonlinear feedback loop, then you have to be able to integrate trauma so that actual neurological feedback loop between the brain and the body can fully develop. And that's when the brain can fully see itself. It can see the pattern, it can see the loop of itself, and it can choose. And science just really struggles with this. And I have sat with this and tried to understand, like, why are we so afraid to imagine that consciousness is primary, because consciousness is just frequency? And Tesla said that. Tesla said everything is frequency, energy, and vibration. Why is that so hard for us to accept, that matter is not primary? Because it does imply that, there is something beyond us. It implies that the earth might be conscious, that it is its own form of intelligence, and that consciousness is not just something special and inherent to humans alone.
Yeah. Maybe the ego could be compared to like the linear side of the brain. And if you're not fully integrated, then you think that whenever your physical life ends, that is death. So the ego is like, the physical body is life and death. And your other side of your brain, once you're integrated, you're like, oh, consciousness is primary. And so I have an eternal soul and I'm not dead. And so I can relax.
Yeah, I think that the ego does, like, it has that fear of like duality. It wants to believe that, like, no, I'm just me, and that there's nothing else beyond that. But if we're all the same energy source, which is electromagnetism, and that electromagnetism, like, blew itself up so that it could exist in matter and have different experiences, in mass. Like people really struggle with that. And I think the other issue, or the other thing that people are afraid of, again, is that the implication then of how consciousness shapes reality. So going back to the double slit experiment, like they don't know truly like why particles behave
Mm-hmm.
differently when they're being watched and when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And it baffles me because there is I might not say this correctly because I don't know. I've heard different people pronounce it differently, but there is something in physics called the Aharonov bomb effect, where you take, an electromagnetic coil and you blast particles at it. And even when around the electromagnetic coil, like even when the particles are passing around parts of the coil where there is no like measurable energy field, it still affects the particles, even where the energy field is registering zero. And even without the particles touching it, they behave differently on the other side of the coil. So that implies that not just like physical interaction or energetic reaction, but just potential interferes with how particles behave. And so that brought me, to the conclusion that like there's no such thing as nothing. And that's where like human cosmology like struggles, because we're like, well, how can something come from nothing? Well, maybe the answer is that there's not, like the idea of nothing isn't really true, because even zero is infinity, which means that there is something and all the things that can be. And so potential itself, yeah, right. I know it makes the brain itch, but like
Yeah,
potential
it's like
itself
that.
is, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, just like energy is neither created nor destroyed, and we're also like looking at the universe, and it just seems like it's continually expanding, and it's just like infinite.
Yeah. So it's like potential itself is an inherent form of energy because it is the possibility of what things can be. And that's not just a linguistic concept. That is a form of energy. And that's like as far as I've got so far. But that means that like if the human brain is like an electromagnetic coil, and it looks like one, right? It's like look at how it folds and forms,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
the potential and the low EM field that a human brain generates does interact with reality and affect the particles and the energies around it, which makes much more sense. I mean, think about how music moves people. Think about how music has changed generations.
Mm.
How it has affects people. Like that's energy. Like that is resonance.
Mm-hmm.
That affects how people
Mm-hmm. The
behave.
same
And
with like
so,
ideas, any
yeah,
creativity, it inspires and it has that aha moment, or like wisdom, you feel it in your body. And that's when I like had my awakening. I was having these aha moments over again, and it was a buildup of all that energy until it was just like overflowed.
yeah, exactly. And like, and somebody was like arguing with me about this the other day, and they're like, until the human brain can just like magically make something from thoughts, then, we're not going to be able to believe in this. I was like, but the human brain does make things from thoughts. Like,
It's
where did,
first in thoughts, and
yeah,
yeah, that's we use our thoughts to then create to
right.
manifest.
Right, where did the thoughts come from? It's like, yeah, that was the thing that like cracked me up, because I was like, well, the iPhone didn't like, yes, like you can't like imagine something and then have it condense in front of your face, but like thoughts precede all creation. And where are those thoughts
Hmm.
coming from? Where are we simulating our thoughts other than
Hmm.
in the energy field around us, in the latent space of the energy field around us? And so like, yeah, that's where I think, you know, science is stuck, and why bridging, science and spirituality are so important. And like maybe this is a good place to wrap up, but like where I think that science and spirituality are stuck is that, religion wants dogma and control, um, because that feels like safety. And
Hmm.
science is stuck in this space where like instead of allowing imagination and curiosity to drive the scientific process, we've got to this place where like we want proof before we will consider something that challenges, our current theories. And that's backwards. We'll
Right.
always stay stuck if we're not willing to consider something other than what validates our reality. And where consciousness is concerned, that's extremely important, because consciousness is nonlinear. It's a feedback loop. You have an, like, take creation, like you have a thought, you go experiment with it, you tinker, you adjust, and then you like recalibrate and then tinker some more. Like the current linear scientific method doesn't allow for that, you know, quick pivot in the middle of the process. And so you're never going to be able to validate that consciousness affects reality with the current linear scientific method, because it doesn't allow for that like feedback
Yeah,
loop to be
scientific tools
validated.
are just meant to examine physicality, not beyond that. So everything else that's not physicality is just discredited.
Exactly. So that's where I'm at right now. What I've been writing about on Threads, and in the
Well, I
paper
want to
that
hear
I
more
wrote.
about
Yeah.
the Schumann resonance and our resonance, and then you also talked about like immortality.
Yeah.
Which, like, oh, that
So
was a good one.
yeah, with the Schumann resonance, so my what I think happens, this is where I'm at in terms of like the research I've done and like what I've put together, is that, so like you imagine that the quantum field is all frequency, like different bands of frequency, like at different wavelengths. So waves have frequency. A frequency is a property of a wave. And so like you have all these different frequency bands, different wavelengths in the quantum field oscillating at different rates. And so like you have matter, like let's imagine that this is how the earth formed. So you have like particles of matter, and they interact, and they bang into each other. But like what's causing them to do that? These different frequency bands that exist in the quantum field are causing them to bang into each other. And you have maybe a frequency band that's swirling in on itself. This is basically like a wave that starts to spin. And then as the wave spins and the waves interact with each other through this spin, they start to form density. There was a really great episode on this is funny, like my husband likes to watch Ancient Aliens, and some of the stuff on there is like a little bit far out for me, honestly, but
I'm
like
into aliens. I haven't seen that one, but
yeah,
yeah.
I mean some of it is a little bit highly speculative, I guess is what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the episodes are really good, and they have one called the Harmonic Code, where it talks about Pythagoras and how he had developed this theory of this musical spheres, and how he believed like each
Mm-hmm.
planet is a note in
Mm.
the symphony of the universe. And I really think that that's right on. It's like you have frequency bands are music, you just can't hear them. A musical note played on the piano is a frequency. Like the notes in music have a specific frequency of their own. And so like and they have in that episode they show where like how waves can interact with one another. And what I really like see in my head is like different waves in the quantum field interacting with each other until they become what's called a standing wave. And it's a kind of a wave that like swirls in place like a tornado or
Mm-hmm.
something. But then what
Mm-hmm.
happens is that as this standing wave swirls in on itself and interacts with itself enough, it starts to condense into matter. And if you look at like the properties of a wave, this makes sense to me, how the circumference of a planet or a star could be wavelength, and then the radius would be amplitude, like the amount that the wave goes up and down over a specific line. And if that's the case, if planets and particles are just standing waves that have swirled into a sphere from the quantum field, then all of the frequencies we see around the Earth are the frequencies of the quantum field that are basically helping hold the planet in place. And that the
Mm-hmm.
planet has to stay on its unique pitch at
Mm-hmm.
7.83 hertz in order to be able to maintain its existence, in order to persist in mass. Really the universe is music, then, that like a planet is matter, a wave that has condensed into matter that has to be balanced with the frequencies in the quantum field in order to stay and exist as matter. And so that would mean that gravity is not a force. It's not something that's pushing down on things, but it's actually harmonics. It is the constructive interference of all these different waves harmonizing together in such a way that they hold mass in place. So constructive interference is when you have two different waves, and then when their amplitude like oscillates at the same or similar rates, then they become like another bigger wave. That makes sense. And so to
Mm-hmm.
me, would make sense then that, like, if you see the Schumann resonance is not just one bandwidth, it's 7.83 hertz, then 14.1 hertz, then 20.3 hertz. And like I said, it lines up with this math function that they still can't solve. That means all of those waves are interacting with one another in a way that they harmonize and create an even bigger kind of wave effect that holds the planet in place. So that is like actually harmonics. It is musical harmonics.
Could you like would that go in line with the different like layers of the Earth? It's like at the core, it's hard. It's more condensed, and so it's like whatever, and then it gets lighter and lighter and lesser as you go out, until it loses its stability, and then it's just space. Is that?
Yeah, I think like what it is that like you have Earth is a standing wave that, you know, swirled in on itself in the field until it became dense enough to hold form. And then basically like the density of Earth is a gradient of those waves, right? Like, so you have less and less density because the standing waves interact with one another enough so that they become dense, you know, in the core. And then like the wave is less and less dense as you go out until you get to the Schumann resonances and the Earth's ionosphere. And then like you have the rest of the quantum field. And so to me, it's like, this is a gradient of a condensed wave. And the waves of the Schumann resonance are the Earth attenuated into a gradient with the rest of the quantum field, and it harmonizes with the rest of the quantum field, and like those waves in the, you know, that make up our atmosphere help like hold the Earth in place. And if you look at particles, right, like particles have electron shells. So there's different energy levels around a particle, and each different layer of the electron shell has different numbers of electrons that it can hold. And if you look at the Earth from that perspective, if you see it more as a giant atom and you look at a particle, it looks like the exact same thing to me. Like you have
the Hermetic principle.
Yeah.
Like the inner is that like the outer.
So like we don't have a way to unify quantum physics and relativity right now. I mean, yeah, with general relativity and quantum physics right now, because they're seeing large mass as something different. And they see gravity as a force. But if gravity is wave harmonics, that would scale from planets to small particles. And it would also make sense that we are brains tuning frequency, and that our brains have evolved to be perfectly aligned with the Earth at 7.83 hertz. And so like this is the thing that I was talking about with like immortality. I don't want to give people the impression that I'm saying like, oh, if you just like raise your vibration, you'll live forever, because people hear that and like I don't want to make it sound like it's like pop culture ascension talk.
Right.
But like I was talking about the volume of of a sphere. The formula for the volume of a sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. 4/3, 4 dimensions in 3D. And everything that creates time is spin. If the planet is a standing wave, a wave that basically spun in the quantum field until it became dense enough, that means that it is spin that enables mass to become a reality, right? It is that the constant rotation of the Earth is what keeps it dense. So you have the Earth spinning and you have it orbiting, and that's what creates time, the spin and the orbit. The thing that holds the spin and the orbit in place are those frequencies attenuated around the planet from the quantum field. That means that time is created by those frequencies, making the Earth's spin and rotation continuous, which means if our bodies are really meant to oscillate at those frequencies, but because of not integrating trauma, because of the brain not evolving so that all of like the signals from the brain are getting down to the rest of the body, if we're eating poison food and we've created an environment where the brain can't fully integrate to run on that frequencies, which is the source of our consciousness, are we actually fully in time? That's my question. Because those frequencies enable the planet to spin, and spin is what creates time. So then, are we decaying? Do our telomeres keep shortening because we're not aligned with the actual frequencies that cause the planet to spin that enable time to exist in the first place? That's my
Mm-hmm.
theory. And I know that that's kind of like, for a lot of people, that's going to be the piece that's like the most wild. But I'm like, well, if we are not aligned with the frequencies of the planet, we're not aligned with the thing that causes the planet to create time, which means we are not fully in the fourth dimension because that is created by frequencies.
Yeah.
Consciousness.
I mean, I can definitely like put together the trauma and the fear and all these things that cause us to tense. And when you're tense, then you're not open. And whenever the energy is hitting you, then you're not allowing it to move through you.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's getting stuck more and more. It's creating more and more tension and more, mental, physical disorder. And eventually death. And the
Mm-hmm.
more open you are, the more you're allowing those to flow freely through you, and healthy it is. And
Yeah.
then also, your body is a natural self-healing mechanism, and so the more open it is, the more it can read itself, like we were saying with our spine and our brain, to see what it needs and deal with these things. So, and then I'm into ascension and these topics, and um, you know, and there's so many stories about like Jesus and gurus and other things about how they were so, I guess, integrated with
Mm-hmm.
their nervous systems and their brain and all the things that they learned how to transcend the body and do all kinds of supernatural type of things, and
Yeah.
um, even with like time and all the things. So
Yeah. And I should clarify that I don't mean to say make it seem like the word ascension is something that I don't believe in per se. I guess where it has a lot of baggage for me is like ascension is tied to a lot of like religious dogma first. So I think for me it's like a
mm-hmm,
trigger word. And then
mm-hmm,
you have a lot of like, I don't want to like demonize people, but like kind of a lot of like pop culture influencers that like
yeah,
casually use these words. Um,
mm-hmm.
but
There's
what
a lot
I
of
think,
spiritual bypassing, or like
yes,
that just not understanding things, the nuance of it, and then they're not operating freely and moving the energy through and doing other things in a healthy way. So it becomes toxic.
yeah, and I think it goes back to like I think the other reason why I struggle a little bit with the word ascension is because it does feel like it also is that doesn't just bypass spirituality, but it bypasses the
With the body,
body. Yes,
right?
and the body
Mm-hmm.
is, I think, again, like if frequency is the quantum field and the brain is just tuning frequency, then the body is the point. It is the transducer. And so, what I like to talk about is anchoring, spiritual anchoring, rather than ascending, because then the point is to stabilize consciousness frequency
Mm-hmm.
in the body, fully
Mm-hmm.
integrated with the brain and the body in a clean feedback loop where they can communicate. And I really do believe that if they were to research this and really look at frequency and like the stability of the integrations of like the brain, whether it's actually coherent or not, they would look at and see why certain people age faster than others, why certain people have more diseases, where these disorders, so-called disorders, are coming from. And I really believe like
Mm-hmm.
that is the key to why our telomeres are breaking down. And it's like the way that I described it in one of my threads is like, the body is amazing. It has these healing properties. It should be able to just keep on maintaining itself. I mean, the earth has existed for 4.5 billion years. Why do humans only last for barely 100 if we're lucky? Um, and so it'd be like if you had a 3D printer and, it could just keep on making copies of the same thing over and over again. But if you put the 3D printer like on a boat in a hurricane, how clean are the copies going to come out, and like how will errors start to exponentially like appear and reproduce based on the turbulence of the 3D printer on the boat? And like to me that's what's happening to the human body. Like the brain and the body aren't aligned. We're not aligned with the planet's frequencies that inherently create its spin in time. And so of course like the body's going to break down because it's not integrated and it's not connected to the source of what makes the body capable of existing in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think it's important to honor and appreciate the body, appreciate the planet, and honor
Mm-hmm.
and its inherent health and wholeness. But from my experience of research too, there, it's so hard to put in words. There's this like evolution and involution.
Mm-hmm.
Like as we evolve, there's also coming from higher dimension consciousness, and it's doing its work.
Mm-hmm.
Astrology talks about like moving through the energy bands and what
Yeah.
it does for us, and that's one way of understanding it. But
Yeah.
but what I'm trying to say is I think that there is, and maybe I don't understand the science that well, but like as we heal and grow, does not our frequency, like, do we speed up, and is matter a function of us, of us, like a fall, like a religion talks about, like
Mm-hmm.
of us contracting, like we're talking about with the trauma,
Yeah.
and that's why it's matter itself. And so within matter there is the higher dimensions and energy, all these things, and there's this beauty, and I think it's important. But is there not actually some kind of transcendence at some point
Mm-hmm.
from even physical reality?
Yeah, I
Big
know.
question.
Yeah, and that is the thing. I think like a lot of people ask that. Like it kind of goes to, yeah, I think the core or the root of that question is like, what is the point of existence? Like what is the point of being in existence? Regardless of like, the level maybe your consciousness is existing in, like what's the point? And what's interesting is like, so going back to the Jehovah's Witness religion, and like that context definitely influences like what I feel like is the point for me. So I'm honest,
Mm-hmm.
like aware of that like influence
Yeah.
in my
Mm-hmm.
own kind of orientation. But in within that religion, like I said, they teach that like the whole point is to like exist on earth and like for as long as you want. And but there are some people within the Jehovah's Witness religion that believe like that they will go to heaven when they die, and that's what they're supposed to do. Like they're like a separate group. And I think that, if there is like a first cause consciousness of humanity, if the quantum field is conscious, if the cosmos is conscious, that like evolution has been working towards consciousness coming to the place where like it has free will and can choose how to exist
Mm.
within reality rather than
Mm-hmm.
consciousness having to default to inevitable
Mm.
patterns. And so I
Mm-hmm.
like what I hope and what I think is that humanity can get to the point where we are able to bridge the spiritual and the scientific such that like we can choose
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
how we exist. And like for me, like I love being on the planet. I think that like so much of our desire to, I feel like a lot of our desire to like know if there's something transcendent of like the planet is because like right now reality is horrible. I mean, the way
Mm.
we've
Mm-hmm.
constructed reality
Mm-hmm.
is horrible. It's miserable. Like, who would want to be
Yeah.
here forever paying taxes,
Mm-hmm.
working for a corporation, slaving away, not being able to do what fully aligns with your soul? Like, no, that is not an
Mm-hmm.
existence I don't think any of us would want to sign up for an extended period of time. And so, like, yes, we're like, there's got to be something more,
Mm-hmm.
blissful and transcendent beyond this reality.
Mm-hmm.
But if we could construct a reality where you could do what aligns with your soul, where you could create from a heart and soul aligned place and you could just be yourself, like would you want to go anywhere? It's like when people
Mm-hmm.
imagine heaven, like this always used to strike me, like when people would imagine heaven when I was still like in Jehovah's Witness religion, they would talk to me about what they imagined doing in heaven. I'm like, but those are things that you could do here if we didn't like totally screw it all up, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
and I think that that's where that hope comes from, that there's something transcendental. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if like how much you've followed like astrologers talking about the Saturn Neptune conjunction, but it's a astrological alignment that happens like very rarely, where Saturn, which is supposed to represent the 3D, and Neptune is supposed to represent like the 5D or illusions or consciousness, spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
they are conjunct, which means like they're kind of like in the same place in the
Mm-hmm.
solar system. And that it's such a rare configuration that I think like one evolutionary astrologer that I follow, he said like he went back like, I don't know, several thousand years and like hasn't seen an astrological alignment like this for like, I don't know, something like 15,000 years. And it's at the very beginning of the zodiac in Aries, at 0 degrees Aries. And people keep on saying like this astrological alignment is about anchoring the 5D and the 3D. And I hear all these people talking about awakening and so like what I really think is happening, and people think astrology is like woo. I just think it's pattern, like it's like a clock, like it is a algorithm that mirrors the patterns of human beings over time. I don't think it's predictive. I think it's descriptive of patterns that continue to repeat, and that every time Pluto gets into Aquarius, which is as a collective consciousness, when Saturn is conjunct at 0 degrees Aries, it's like an evolutionary pivot. Like, will consciousness have evolved to the point where it can choose how it shapes reality, or will it just continue to be shaped by reality? And I think like if humanity could make that pivot, we wouldn't feel like we needed to escape. But right now, like it feels like hell.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do think that, it's both, the physical reality of what's happened and what's happening. And, there is hell aspects to it. But it's also your perspective and your inner state, and you can be in heaven or in hell, depending on that.
Yeah.
And I do believe that we are here to, bring heaven on earth and create this, master reality in a sense, and make our choice and have sort of a utopia. But like, I'll just pull one example. One of my references like Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body, Astral Travel books. And there's like a institute. And it talks about like the future and how humans sometimes they'll be in the body and sometimes they'll be playing around in the astral and the energetic, and they have that choice. And the earth goes back to this natural state of being of nature. And like, we don't need cars. We don't need this stuff because we have the option. And there's sort of this sense of beautiful utopia, but also there's also more. And I think I'm all about like, I want to experience all of reality in all its ways. And I think that that's what the function of God is. For me, I say God is love, and that's evolution. That's continued growth and continued exploration and newness and all the things. So I love the earth. I love physicality, and I can see how we can continue to make it even better and better. But I also think there's more out there, and I'm like, I want to experience it all.
Yeah, I don't think that that's, I don't think that those are oppositional, like,
right.
kind of perspectives, right? Like, the issue is that we can't know until science is willing to embrace the subjectivity of consciousness more than they have. Like, we don't really know what's possible because they won't consider what is possible. And so then when you bring up things like that, it's like, well, that's woo, it's pseudoscience. Like, but all beliefs are pseudoscience until they become science. Like, they only become science when you're willing to test and investigate them. And the linear scientific method just doesn't allow for looking into things like that. I always say metaphysics are just physics that science is unwilling to measure.
I like that.
Yeah, you're not willing to measure it, so we can't figure it out. And so I just think that, like, if I have existed, like, what I hear you saying is like there's a desire to evolve, and a huge part of that evolution is being able to learn like the nature of existence, and that like if the body means like not being able to learn those things, like you don't want to be limited by the body. But if there's a way to learn those things and have the best of all of those worlds, I'm like, yes, I think that like we should be able to figure out what those things are. And like, but we can't until we flip our view of the universe, which is to see that consciousness is just frequency being transduced by the body, and the quantum field is frequency. And until they like flip that paradigm, we're stuck with, kind of just thinking we're all meat sacks walking around the planet that just happened to accidentally become self-aware.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And on a darker note, there is like, I think the US government had they had a remote viewing program. They did all kinds of ESP experiments. They might still be using that. Some people say that they've interacted with ETs and reverse engineer technology, and there's things like med beds out there, and it's just because of like that fear that we're talking about and that control. They don't want to release these things to the public because it would it would create chaos in the order of things are and the people that are in power. So that's one perspective.
Yeah, I've heard reports of that, like they have evidence of things that they know more about, and I think it kind of just goes back to this idea of the quantum field being frequency, and that gravity is not a force, but it's actually the constructive interference of waves creating like harmonics, the equivalent of musical harmonics. And I don't know like how familiar you are with Robert Edward Grant, but he's like a polymath, and like he specifically, I saw him on a podcast saying that like no, we always imagine that like aliens would be like coming to conquer and take all our resources, and like that's an ego projection of humanity's current like stage of consciousness. Right. That is what humanity does.
Right.
So we imagine that any other civilization that would be extraterrestrial would behave that way, but like he was saying that like no, if the quantum field is frequency and gravity is harmonics, he didn't say that part, that's me, but like he was saying that no civilization that has like mastered space travel would be a civilization that is oriented towards domination, because it is just
right. They'd be a global oneness planetary that is acting together, and so they wouldn't be warring, and then they wouldn't try to be conquering other planets.
Which is like, if they do exist, then that's why they haven't come here, because they're like, those people are so far from figuring this out that like let's right. leave them be until they get it together. But like I think that if there is something else, some other level of existence that is not embodied, I think that like for sure, if you can integrate your trauma and like be a decent person in form, in matter, like then you have really I don't want to say mastered, because I feel like that doesn't leave room for evolution, but like you've done the work, because density is hard.
Right. Oh, and that's what spirituality says a lot. It's like Earth is a very dense planet, and there's a lot of polarity, a lot of the spectrum of negative and positive experiences is so vast. But while that's also hard, it also creates more evolution and understanding and richness when we do experience something good. We see the wide differences in experience, and so that helps us appreciate, and I think that'll continue to help the universe.
Yeah, for sure. I hope so. Anyway, that's why I want to tell my own story, because I think again, like consciousness shapes reality, and when we share these experiences and kind of like the explorations in understanding what consciousness is, it shifts the window so that people do feel more comfortable considering that reality might be different than what we think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been amazing conversation. Definitely stretching my brain muscles, but I feel like, even things I don't understand, I'm like, I can pick up a morsel of I see the truth in this. And so, I think you're onto a lot of things, and it's really cool to see your own journey of discovery and helping the rest of humanity.
Likewise. Thank you. Yeah. It gave me a lot of food for thought, so I have some things to go research now. I really appreciated it and enjoyed the conversation a lot.
Yeah. And thank you also again for being courageous and talking about the past and, cults and stuff like that. And I think that's great. And that's going to be helpful for other people who may have had the same experiences.
Thank you.